This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Many risks can arise from relying on or using an IT system, and it is absolutely essential that management recognize these risks, identify them, to assess them, and then to decide what, if anything, has to be done about them. So here is a reasonably comprehensive list of the sort of risks that we might be experiencing. And first, there is physical damage or theft really to the hardware. So it could be accidental damage, like a cup of coffee spilling over a machine, and suddenly you begin losing data because the electronics have been compromised and so on. It could be theft. Theft of laptops, say, would be the easy one. But it's not so much maybe the theft of the hardware itself. It's what was on the disk, what information was this holding, and is this going to cause great embarrassment to us? If it's released to the public, is it going to be helping our competitors and so on? We're getting on really looking at risks to data and systems integrity. And of course the common ones that you will know about, there's a virus and there's hacking. So some viruses are simply a bit of a nuisance. They come up with silly messages or something of that sort. Other viruses are much more malicious. They begin wiping files and so on. Recently there has been a new type of virus around, which goes under the name of ransomware. Basically, this holds your data to ransom. It encodes the data, it encrypts the data, and then you get an email saying, unless you pay us quite a lot of money, you're not going to find out how to unencrypt it. But if you do pay us some money, then we'll send you an unencryption key, and you can get your data back. There can be malicious damage. I'm talking malicious damage to the data. It could just be an employee who's irritated by you, who decides to delete the sales ledger, and you don't know who your debtors are, or who begins changing data on the sales ledger, maybe changing credit limits or changing prices on a price file, so that inventory is being sold at a stupid price, and you're going to be making a loss on it. Industrial espionage hits the headlines quite a bit now, where one company gets into the computer system of another company and can maybe steal their industrial designs, their patents and so on, so that they can begin kind of making these products without having to undergo all the expense of the research and development. Or you can find out who their customers are, or you can find out what prices they're charging their customers. And again, this is going to give you help in defeating that competitor, maybe by making yourself more attractive to their customers. Industrial action, people in the IT department going on strike, not running the computers, holding again almost to ransom. There's something called denial of service. This is what happens some websites. If people want to bring a website down, what you arrange is for lots and lots and lots of computers to try to access that website at the same time, and the system simply can't cope with it, and it kind of collapses for a while. And illegal downloads. You might not have thought that as a risk to data and systems integrity. First thing about illegal downloads is they could contain a virus. And the virus then can work havoc in your organization. Second thing, it is illegal. The downloads could be illegal as such. They could be, say, of illegal pornographic material. This gets into your organization. It offends people. Maybe the police are called in about how did the data get there and so on. It's not a good situation. But actually, the process of downloading from illegal sources, downloading television series without paying for them as you should through Netflix. You go to a pirate site basically, and okay, you shouldn't do it. It'll maybe get you into trouble, but certainly doing it on a company machine is something that should not be tolerated by the company at all. Operational error were maybe we just do the wrong journal entry, maybe we delete the wrong file, delete the wrong account, maybe we instead of updating for next year's prices, we update for last year's prices. All sorts of things can go wrong on the operational side. Fraud. Many people would say that fraud is easier to perpetrate on an IT system than it is manually. At least if you're doing something manually, there tends to be a signature or something of that sort, or handwriting maybe you can follow. In an IT system, it can be very difficult to track back to see maybe who changed a bit of data or who actioned a particular journal entry. There are ways, but it's maybe a little bit more difficult. Data protection risks. Many countries have got data protection legislation which protects personal data of, say, employees and customers and so on. And if you are careless with this personal data and a hacker gets in and then this personal data kind of escapes into the community, then there can be very substantial damages to pay apart from the loss of reputation. Inappropriate systems which are too slow, systems which don't give you the information which is needed to service your customers and so on. It's maybe not an immediate disaster, but over time, if you can't get the information to promptly deal with customers' queries, then they go somewhere else. And finally, systems development risks. In the UK, at the moment, VAT is 20%. So if something has a net price of, say, 200, then the VAT, the sales tax effectively, which we're looking at, is going to be 40, and the gross is 240. And what you have to do is to charge your customer 240, you keep 200, and 40 goes to the government as a tax. Now, let's say you have a programmer, and there's no reason why a programmer knows anything about tax or VAT at all, but the programmer simply makes a typing error and puts the VAT in at 2%. So now when you raise an invoice, it's 200 plus 2%, so it'll be 40. You'll be charging your customer 204. A kind of gross price. Now your customer might not object to that, but our tax authorities certainly will. And if they find out about this, then you are going to be liable really personally for the missing 36. Your company is. So the tax authority said you should have been collecting 40 VAT on this. You've only collected 4 and given us 4. Where's the other 36? And it will be the company who's made this error who has to pay. It won't be their customer. You can't go back to the customer and demand another 36. So a completely innocent error in developing or maintaining software can give devastating effects. If you're now asked for essentially 36% of net sales over the last year, it's going to knock quite a hole in your profits. IT controls fall into two sorts. There's general controls, which is kind of the almost the environment in which the computer sits and the software sits, policies, procedures relating to the computer environment. So, data center and network operations. Great thing about that is maybe you have passwords. Don't let people into where the server is. They have some sort of key to get in. If people are going to log on to the system, they have to have a password. And the great thing about a password is you can then begin to tag or label all transactions with the identifier of the person who put it through. So it's going to begin to mitigate against fraud a little bit if you know you're going to be tracked. System software acquisition, change and maintenance. Now we talked about the change and that VAT that went wrong, the 2% rather than the 20%. But we're going to be in problems if we get software, buy it, that isn't up to the mark. It doesn't do what we need or doesn't do it quickly enough. If we change it or maintain it too slow or incorrectly, it can get ourselves into fantastic problems. And really what you need is a system of authorization for the changes. You're not allowed to change the programs without written authorization. And then there has to be a system in place that when you change a program, then it is extensively tested to make sure it is doing things correctly before it's actually used as your kind of everyday program. There is the applications system here as well. So really the system software is dealing with things like the version of Windows and so on. Down here is exactly the same problem. This is maybe your version of the accounting program, something of that sort. Again, make sure we get the right one. Make sure it's developed properly. Make sure it works okay before you begin to use it. Access security, access to not only the hardware, but also to data which is there. And we also need something called disaster recovery. Now, disaster recovery we'll see at the end, okay? But it's very, very important. Basically, disaster recovery is not just when you lose a file, it is when you lose your whole IT system on which you may be absolutely dependent to be trading. Other controls, sometimes called application controls. So we've got general controls, controls which are kind of sitting over everything in the IT department, applying to every program and piece of data which is there. Then you have application controls, which are in a way specific to different applications. One set of controls for wages, another one for sales, another one for purchases, and so on. What we have got in here, first of all, there's access controls. Before you can update anything, before you can put through a transaction, you have to be authorized to do it. So it could be physical. You have to have actually a key card of some sort to turn the computer on. It could be passwords. More and more people are beginning to look at physiological data, fingerprints, retinal scans, and so on. So that the machine simply doesn't almost come to life until the right person is sitting there. Integrity controls, really that our input is correct. So what we can do there is we can have passwords before we're even allowed to put any input in, so at least the right person is doing it. Then you have things like range tests. So if you're putting in the days in a week, let's say we're trading 6 days a week, Monday through to Saturday, and the number 1 to 6, and somebody mistypes and puts in 10, then we know that's wrong. We know that cannot be a day of the week, and it throws that out. It could be if people are putting in timesheets for the number of hours they work. You could set it that maybe no one's allowed, or certainly not without it being looked at again, to put in more than 60 hours, which is substantial overtime. But obviously, if they mistyped, and instead of typing in 40 hours, they put in 400, you don't want that to be kind of going automatically through and producing a huge wage for this person at the end of the month. Dependency checks or dependence checks, well, one bit of data depends on another. So if you're putting in a date, there is actually nothing wrong potentially with putting in 31. So if you're putting in March, 31/3 is okay. But if you put in 31/2, and February is a valid month, 31 is potentially a valid day, but the two together don't work. The number of days you're allowed is dependent on the date you're putting in, and that can trap an error. Format checks. We've probably all tried to type in our credit card, and maybe instead of, I think it's 16 digits across the front, the big number, I think of 4 groups of 4, you happen to miss one of those out, and you only manage to put in 12 digits, and immediately the system will come back and say it's invalid. It hasn't looked at your bank at all, it hasn't asked your bank, it just knows that 12 digits for a credit card is simply not the right format. Control totals, we work around this way here. If you're putting in 3 invoices, and the values of the invoices are like that, then we know that's going to be coming, I think, to 57. So what you do is you add up your invoices before you start, and you enter this here. This is sometimes called a batch total. You put in 57, so you're kind of saying to the machine, the value of the invoices I put in next should add up to 57. So if something is mistyped, if instead of putting in 15 we put in 16, then of course it's not going to work. The batch will not reconcile and it will be rejected. Or if you turn 2 invoices over at once and you leave out the 16, again it's simply not going to reconcile. Matching, very good for completeness controls. You want the data to be in there complete and accurately, really. But if you're putting in a timesheet, really everyone on the payroll should put in a timesheet. And it's very, very easy then for the system to say, this employee, that employee, that employee, I haven't matched their wage record with a timesheet. Something's gone missing. It doesn't all match up. Sequence checks, again, very useful for completeness controls. If you're putting in, let's say, if you still have it, checks, for example, checks are numerically pre-numbered. And you can program the system to remember to keep a track of all the sequence numbers, sequentially pre-numbered documents, the numbers of those which have been put in. And if, for example, at the end of the month, the sequence is kind of going like that, then it can report that, item 1003 seems to be missing from this. I need some information about that. We'll also should prevent you putting in the same one twice, because it knows I've already got document 1001. I'm not going to take it again. Check digits here. It's a kind of, we didn't get into the detail too much, but it's a kind of making particularly account numbers and part numbers up in a particular way so that they comply with particular mathematical rules. So a very simple one, and this is the actual ones they use are far more complicated than this, but we needn't kind of worry about too much. But a simple check digit could be if your real number is 15, so if your actual account number is 15 in here, your real check digit could, for example, be 6. So it is divisible by 7. So if instead of putting in 15 as the account number, I mistyped and put in 16, so I put in a number instead of being 156, I managed to type in 166. Then 16 plus 6 comes to 22. It's not divisible by 7. It doesn't work right. So if I had a number like an account number like, say, 25, then the check digit would be 3. So an allowable account number would be 253, basically. But 243 wouldn't work, and 244 wouldn't work, because both of those would kind of trip up on this test, if you like, that the first 2 numbers taken as, a number, 25, plus the last one, it should make the a number which is divisible by 7. So you could, I suppose, make an error and it would still work. But the chances of typing in a wrong number, wrong account number, or part number, or employee number, and accidentally, if you like, having it divisible by 7 is going to be very low. Oops. What we we should be having in here, and sorry, it's not showing in here, it will say backup controls. We need to make sure that regularly you take copies of the data because you don't want to lose the important data. You always want to be able to reconstruct the latest up-to-date position. Things go wrong mechanically in computers. Disks crash, if you like. And disks crash, you might lose information on the disk. So you want to be able to go back maybe to what it was saying yesterday, and then we can put through 1 day's transactions. We need to keep those, and you can reconstitute the disk, the data. Theft and fraud. Theft of data, fraud, maybe by processing improper orders through to the system, or putting in bonus payments, or changing your salary. These are all ways of creating fraud within the organization. And again, one of the main ways is kind of passwords. Passwords is a kind of authorization. If you know the password, you are authorized to do something. Internet, well, we need to think about virus. We need to think about firewalls to stop hacking. And then you need rules. You need rules telling people, don't download software off the internet, don't download illegal photographs or illegal material on the internet at all. If you do that, you're going to be losing your job. And then systems development controls. We've kind of looked at this already. Developing for new VAT, developing new sales systems. You cannot be too cautious about this. You have to make sure the system is well tested before you try it out. And there was one time, I think about 5 years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, what was then one of our largest banks, Royal Bank of Scotland, there was a software update. Just routine, but there was an error in it. And it meant that nobody for at least a week, 2 weeks in some cases, could really access their account over the internet. Nobody could get money out of the automatic teller machines and so on. The whole thing just gummed up, really. The whole system gummed up for about a week, causing huge inconvenience to individuals and to businesses. Disaster planning. Disaster planning is the term given to having planned in advance what to do if really your whole IT system was lost. If you have a business like an airline, which is continually taking bookings, continually checking people in, is continually looking after the luggage is and special meals and so on, it really can't survive or trade very long at all if the IT system goes down. Similarly, with very many financial institutions, they rely on having more or less instant information, often very quick information. If you're dealing on the stock exchange or dealing in currency and so on, you have to use information quickly. Disaster planning, I suppose, got a real kind of boost, really. I suppose it was probably in the 1980s, when in the City of London there were a couple of bombs set by the IRA right in the middle of the City of London, into financial areas and so on. And people realized how vulnerable their IT systems are to damage. And people kind of learnt from those lessons. And when the 9/11 attack happened in the Twin Towers in New York, Okay, lots of people were killed, but the IT systems for the companies in the Twin Towers, most of those companies were up and trading within about a week, because they all had very well designed and rehearsed disaster planning systems. And the heart really is to have standby procedures. That you have in some systems a parallel computer running continuously, mirroring your system, or at least another computer that you can turn on very quickly and get up to speed. The first thing to do really is to minimize physical risks, however. It used to be people were very proud of their computers. You'd walk along the street, there'd be a great big window in the office, and behind that window you'd see the computers whirring away. They were showing off how modern they were. You won't get that nowadays. People will hide their computers away. Some are very secure to minimize the physical risks. Then we have this contingency planning. What are we going to do if the worst does come to the worst? We want standby procedures. We want to be able to reconstruct the data very quickly if we need to do that. And we also need to tell personnel what to do, because think of a disaster, there's going to be a bit of panic and confusion, I suppose, there. So what we have to do is to define responsibility, who's going to do what in the disaster. We have to assess the risks. We have to maybe prioritize. Not every part of the IT system has to be brought back immediately. The wages and salaries, the salaries maybe don't have to be done at the end of the month. We can be more relaxed about those, but we need to be able to service customers' phone calls really, really quickly. We will have arranged the backup and standby arrangements. This should be very remote. There's no point in having your standby computer in the next room. You want it in at least the next town, with separate power supplies. You might even want it in a separate country. Communicate with staff when the disaster happens. They will be worried maybe about their jobs. They'll be worried about what's going to become of this company. And PR is very important. You have to reassure your customers, we've had this big fire in our IT system, but look, within 3 hours we're up and running. Don't worry about it. We can still provide the service to you. So business continuity planning, how we're going to keep the business running, who's doing what are the really important things to be doing, how are we going to reassure our clients, that do we have to temporarily move somewhere else to temporary offices till we get this one fixed and so on, how are we actually going to continue trading, and as a lay-in advance, either your own hardware or access to a company's hardware which specializes in actually providing this continuity, these standby procedures.